Most men find out their marriage is over with divorce papers. I found out in my own basement, and by the time I understood what was really happening, my name was already on things I'd never touched. My name is Lewis Jackson. I'm 51 years old. I own a modest three-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio. I coach youth soccer on Saturday mornings, and until 11 days ago, I genuinely believed I was one of the luckier men alive. We will get to that. But before we do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments after listening. You are going to love it here. Now let me tell you about my wife. Her name is Clare Jackson. Married 15 years, together for 18. She likes lavender candles, true crime podcasts, which in hindsight should have been a red flag the size of Montana, and she takes her coffee with exactly 1 sugar and a splash of oat milk. I know this woman. I know her. Or I thought I did. This all started on a Tuesday in February, which is already the worst month of the year. Claire was in Atlanta visiting her college roommate Donna. She'd been gone 3 days. I was living my best bachelor life. Cereal for dinner, sports on every screen, wearing the same hoodie for 48 hours straight. Thriving, honestly. Then the furnace started making a sound. Not a normal sound. Not the usual groan and click that every furnace makes when it's cold enough outside to freeze your good judgment. This was a sound, low, rhythmic, like something metallic chewing on something it shouldn't. I called the first HVAC company that came up on Google. Guy named Dale showed up 40 minutes later. Dale Briggs from Briggs & Sons Heating and Cooling. Nice guy, big mustache. Smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil. "Give me 20 minutes, Dale said, heading toward the basement. I gave him 20 minutes. Made myself a sandwich. Watched half a highlight reel. Living. Then my phone buzzed. A text. From Dale, who was literally in my basement. "Mr. Jackson, there's a locked door behind your storage shelves. Who's inside?" I actually laughed. Out loud. I typed back, "Dale, buddy, we don't have a locked door back there." 3 dots. Then, "Sir, I can hear breathing inside, and there are 4 padlocks on the outside." I stopped chewing my sandwich. 4 padlocks. On the outside. I want you to understand something about that detail, because I didn't fully process it at the moment. Locks on the outside of a door don't keep intruders out. They keep whatever's inside in. That's not a security measure. That's a cage. I was down those basement stairs in 10 seconds flat. Dale was standing in front of our old metal storage shelves, the ones Claire insisted we keep even though I'd suggested donating them 3 separate times, and they were pulled slightly away from the wall. Behind them was a door I had never seen in 15 years of living in that house. 15 years. It was a plain hollow core door, painted the same gray as the basement wall. If the shelves were flush against it, which they always had been, you'd never know it existed. 4 heavy-duty padlocks, each on a separate hasp, and from behind it, faint but unmistakable, the slow rhythmic sound of breathing. "Call the police," I told Dale. "Already dialing," he said. 3 officers arrived within 8 minutes. I stood in my own basement feeling like a stranger in someone else's nightmare while they cut the locks. I kept texting Claire, "Hey, call me. Something's going on." No response. She was probably at dinner with Donna. I told myself that. I needed to tell myself something. The door swung open. The room was empty. Not just empty, swept. Clean concrete floor, a single bare bulb overhead, not even switched on. A small Bluetooth speaker in the corner, still warm to the touch. And on the floor next to it, a cheap burner phone, screen cracked, balanced on a cardboard box. The breathing had been a recording. Looping. Remotely triggered. Officer Tate, young guy, looked like he just graduated high school last Thursday. Picked up the burner phone with gloved hands and turned it over. "Someone activated this recently," he said, "like within the last hour." "So someone triggered it while Dale was down here," I said. "Looks that way. I want you to stay with me here, because this is the part where the floor started moving under my feet, even though I was standing completely still. Someone knew Dale was in my basement. Someone waited until he was near those shelves, then triggered a recording specifically designed to make a furnace repairman text his client in alarm, specifically designed to make that client call the police, specifically designed to put 3 officers in a secret room in my house. This wasn't a prank. This was choreography. They found the storage unit receipt 48 hours later. I don't know exactly when the shift happened, when I stopped being the homeowner and started being a person of interest. But it happened quietly, the way bad things usually do. One minute Officer Tate is asking routine questions. The next, a detective named Roy Callahan is sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, with a yellow legal pad, asking if I'd ever been to a storage facility on Mercer Road. I had not, except according to the records, I had. Twice. Paid in cash. My name on the rental agreement, and when they opened Unit 114, they found women's clothing, a prepaid debit card linked to an account in my name, and a photograph. A woman I had never seen before, 30-something, dark hair, smiling at the camera like she had no idea what her photograph would one day be used for. Mr. Jackson, Detective Callahan said, watching my face very carefully. This woman was reported missing 11 days ago. Her name is Angela Pruitt. Do you know her? No, I said. I've never seen her in my life. And that was true. Completely, absolutely true. But here's the thing that broke something open inside my chest. The thing I didn't tell Detective Callahan that night, because I needed to be alone to process what it meant. When I got home, I went upstairs, straight to our bedroom, to the shelf above Claire's nightstand where she keeps her books, the one she's already read, the one she revisits, the one she keeps close. I pulled them out, one by one, and there she was. Angela Pruitt, printed on a small square of photo paper, tucked inside the back cover of Claire's worn copy of In Cold Blood, smiling. I sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for 15 years, in the house that was somehow no longer mine, holding a photograph of a missing woman that my wife had hidden in plain sight, and I thought about all 18 years, every dinner, every vacation, every quiet Sunday morning where I'd watched her read that exact book with her coffee, one sugar, splash of oat milk, completely unbothered. How long had Angela Pruitt been inside that back cover? How long had Claire been planning this? At 51, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a man was losing his health, his job, or his mind. Turns out, the worst thing is realizing the person who slept beside you for 15 years was never really there at all. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you for real. Asterisk, here's something nobody tells you about being framed by your own wife. The hardest part isn't the evidence. It's realizing the woman you loved was never confused, never lost, never going through a phase. She was always working. I need you to understand where I was mentally at this point. It had been 6 days since Dale Briggs texted me from my basement. 6 days since 3 police officers stood in a swept empty room in my house, looking at me like I was a man who needed watching. 6 days since Detective Roy Callahan started showing up. Not always announced, not always with questions, sometimes just present. Parked one house down like I wouldn't notice a Crown Victoria idling on a residential street. I noticed Roy. I'm 51, not blind. Claire had come home from Atlanta 2 days after the basement incident. I hadn't told her everything on the phone, just that something strange had happened, and she needed to come back. When she walked through the door, she looked exactly the way a worried wife should look. Concerned eyes, tight hug, both hands on my face. Louis, what happened? Are you okay? And God help me, for about 45 minutes I believed her. She cried when I showed her the room, real tears, or what looked like real tears, and I'm still not entirely sure there's a difference. She held my arm while I explained the padlocks, the speaker, the burner phone. She said all the right things. That's terrifying. Who would do this? Should we get a lawyer? That last one. Should we get a lawyer? I thought she was being protective. I know now she was being precise. The storage unit broke her performance, but only for a second. When Detective Callahan came back 4 days later and told us both about Unit 114 on Mercer Road, I watched Claire's face. Most people wouldn't have caught it. It lasted maybe half a heartbeat, a tiny involuntary stillness, like a computer screen freezing before it recovers. Then the tears came back. Someone is setting Louis up, she said firmly, reaching for my hand across the kitchen table. This is obviously a setup. My husband has never been to that storage unit. Callahan looked at her, then at me, then back at her. Mrs. Jackson, he said carefully, how do you know it's obvious? She didn't miss a beat. Because I know my husband. I replayed that moment approximately 400 times over the next 48 hours. She didn't say he would never do something like this. She didn't say that's impossible. She said she knew me, kept the focus on certainty rather than character. It was a lawyer's answer dressed up in a wife's voice. Precise. Here's where it starts getting architectural. Stay with me. I have a friend named Gary Howell. We've been friends since college, which means he's known me long enough to tell me hard things without flinching. Gary works in insurance fraud investigation, which means he spends his professional life figuring out how people construct lies that look like truth. I called him on day 7, told him everything. He was quiet for a long time. Louis, he finally said, how many joint accounts do you and Claire have? 3. Checking, savings, and a household card. Who manages them? I opened my mouth, then closed it. Claire managed them. Had since year 2 of our marriage, when I'd mentioned offhandedly that I found budgeting tedious, and she'd offered to handle it. I hadn't thought about it since. Why would I? The bills got paid, the savings grew, everything was fine. Pull every statement, Gary said. Every single one. Go back 5 years minimum. I pulled 7. What I found didn't scream at me. That was the genius of it. There were no dramatic withdrawals, no suspicious transfers to offshore accounts, nothing that would make a movie audience gasp. Instead, there were small, patient, methodical movements. $100 here routed to an account I didn't recognize. A recurring subscription charge to a business name I'd never heard of. A cash withdrawal every 3rd month. Never enough to trigger a flag, always just under the threshold that would require reporting. Over 7 years, it added up to just over $60,000. $60,000 moved so quietly I'd never heard a sound. I sat at my kitchen desk at 2 in the morning staring at those numbers and felt something I can only describe as a specific kind of cold. Not the cold of fear, the cold of scale, because this wasn't something Claire had decided to do after a bad year or a rough patch. The first irregular transaction was dated 14 months after our wedding. She started planning this when we were still unpacking boxes in our first apartment together. 14 months in. Gary came over the next morning. We spread everything across the dining room table. Bank records, the storage unit paperwork, the police report, a timeline I'd built on a legal pad at 3 a.m. Gary studied it for a long time without speaking, which is his way of being respectful about the fact that what he's looking at is worse than you think. The storage unit rental, he said finally. Walk me through your phone that week. What do you mean? Where was your phone the night before the rental agreement was signed? I thought about it. On the nightstand. I always charge it overnight on the nightstand. Gary looked at me. And where was Claire? The bedroom. Obviously. We shared a bedroom. We shared a bed. We had for 15 years, and I had never once thought of my charging phone on my nightstand as a vulnerability. She had taken my phone while I slept. Driven to Mercer Road. Signed the rental agreement in my name. She knew my signature the way you know a song you've heard 10,000 times. Paid cash. Set up the unit. And been back in bed before my alarm went off. I thought about the morning after. Had she seemed different? Tired? Off? I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember because it was a Tuesday, and on Tuesdays I leave early for a 7 a.m. budget call, and I kiss her forehead and grab my travel mug, and I don't look back. 18 years of not looking back. The furnace call, Gary said quietly. I looked at him. You said you called the HVAC company the morning the furnace started making noise. Did you call from your cell or your landline? We don't have a landline. We haven't had one in years. Cell, I said. Pull your outgoing call log for that morning. I already knew what I was going to find before I found it. I think some part of me had known since the moment Dale texted me from the basement. I just hadn't been ready to look directly at it. The call to Briggs & Sons Heating and Cooling had been made from my number at 8:47 a.m. I had been at the office by 7. I had a timestamp on my parking garage entry to prove it. Claire had made the call. From my phone, which she'd taken again, or maybe kept, and used to schedule a repairman she knew would go to the basement, find the shelves, find the door, hear the breathing, and text me an alarm. She had engineered the entire first act. The furnace noise, I still don't know how she did it, but Gary suspects a small mechanical device attached to the blower, something simple. Something removable. The secret room, built or discovered and prepared over God knows how long. The recording, the burner phone, the timing of the trigger. She had stood in Atlanta at dinner with Donna, and with one tap on a remote app had set the whole thing in motion, while I ate a sandwich and watched highlights upstairs. Louis, Gary said, and his voice had dropped to the kind of register men use when they're about to say something they wish they didn't have to. This isn't a plan someone puts together in a few months. The financial movement alone goes back 7 years. The identity construction, your name on accounts you didn't open, your prints on a unit you didn't visit, that takes practice. Repetition. She didn't just study you. He paused. She became fluent in you. I stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The yard I'd mowed 1,000 times. The garden Claire planted 2 summers ago, which I'd helped water every evening that fall because she said the seedlings needed consistency. I had watered her garden while she was building my grave. At 51 years old, I had one move left, and I hadn't told Gary about it yet. I hadn't told anyone, because the only way it worked was if Claire believed, completely convincingly believed, that her plan had succeeded. She needed to think she'd won, and I needed her to stay comfortable just long enough. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a man when he stops being afraid and starts being dangerous. I found that quiet on a Wednesday morning, sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee and 7 years of bank statements, and I made a decision that I have not lost 1 minute of sleep over since. Asterisk. I did not call a lawyer. I did not confront Claire. I did not go back to Detective Callahan with what Gary and I had found, because here's the thing about evidence. It only works if the person presenting it is credible. And right now, in the eyes of Columbus PD, I was a 51-year-old man whose name was on a storage unit containing a missing woman's belongings. My credibility was not exactly at its peak. Claire had thought of that too. Of course she had. So I did the only thing she hadn't planned for. I became someone she couldn't read. First I called my brother, Dennis. Dennis Jackson, retired Army, currently living in Dayton, the kind of man who owns 3 guns legally, speaks in short sentences, and has never in his life panicked about anything. I drove to Dayton on a Thursday morning, told Claire I needed a few days to clear my head, and watched her face arrange itself into the perfect expression of sympathetic understanding. "Take all the time you need, baby," she said. I almost smiled. At Dennis's kitchen table, over black coffee and leftover cornbread, I laid out everything: the basement, the storage unit, the bank records, the call logs, the photograph in the back of In Cold Blood. Dennis listened without interrupting, which for him is the equivalent of anyone else screaming in horror. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You said she talks to someone," he said. "Someone she trusts." "Her friend Renee," I said. "Renee Gallagher. They've been close since before Claire and I met. Talk every week, sometimes twice. In person or phone? Both. Renee lives in Cincinnati. She visits maybe 4 times a year. They also do these long calls, 2, 3 hours sometimes. Claire takes them in the sunroom with the door closed." Dennis nodded slowly. "How long ago did you put the baby monitor in the sunroom?" I looked at him. He looked back at me, completely straight-faced. "Dennis," I said, "I haven't." "I know you haven't," he said, "but you're about to. Here is something I want to be clear about. I am not a vengeful man by nature. I coached youth soccer for 11 years. I have never in my life thrown a punch outside of a gym. I am the man at the cookout who makes sure everyone has a drink and remembers the vegetarians. Vengeance is not in my original wiring. But I am an extremely patient man, and patience, it turns out, is the only currency that matters in a long game." Dennis ordered the monitor online, paid cash at a UPS store kiosk, shipped to a P.O. box, the kind of operational precision that 18 years in the Army apparently just permanently installs in a person. I drove back home on Saturday, told Claire I felt better, let her hug me in the doorway while I counted her heartbeats against my chest, and felt absolutely nothing. That was the strangest part. Not rage, not grief, just clarity. I installed the monitor on a Sunday afternoon while Claire was grocery shopping. Small device, wireless, tucked behind a decorative plant on the sunroom windowsill that I had never once moved in 15 years, and neither had she. Took me 4 minutes. I drove to Dennis's that evening, confirmed the audio feed was clean on his laptop, and drove home for dinner. Claire made pasta, asked if I was feeling more like myself. "Getting there," I said. She smiled and refilled my water glass. I waited 19 days. 19 days of being Lewis Jackson, loving husband, cooperative resident, casual subject of a missing persons investigation. 19 days of answering Callahan's questions patiently, of letting Claire hold my hand in front of him. of watching her perform concern so flawlessly that even I had moments, brief disorienting moments, of wondering if I'd constructed the whole thing in my grief. Then, on a Thursday evening in the third week, Renee Gallagher came to visit. I made myself scarce, told Claire I was heading to Gary's for the evening, kissed her cheek, and drove exactly 4 blocks before parking and opening my phone. The audio was crystal. They talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things: Renee's job, a cousin's wedding, a restaurant in Cincinnati worth the drive. I almost convinced myself I was wrong, that I had planted a listening device in my own sunroom based on paranoia and pain and Gary Howell's insurance fraud instincts. Then Claire's voice shifted. It was subtle, like a musician dropping from one key to another. Same instrument, same hands, different everything. She got quieter, more precise. The warmth drained out of her tone the way water drains from a bathtub, steadily and completely. "He has no idea," Claire said. Renee was quiet for a moment. "You're sure? He's walking around here making me coffee in the mornings. Roy is treating him like a suspect, and he's just Lewis. He's exactly who he's always been. He can't see past what's in front of him. He never could." "And the woman? Angela?" "Safe," Claire said. "She agreed to disappear for 60 days. She's in Phoenix. I paid her well enough that she won't talk, and by the time 60 days is up, Lewis will be too buried to matter." A pause. "Claire." Renee's voice was careful, uncertain. "What happens to him? Actually happens?" "He becomes the answer to a question the police are already asking," Claire said simply. "They have his name, his prints, his financial trail. I just have to let it finish building. Another few weeks and it won't need me anymore. It'll have its own gravity." "And you'll be where?" "Somewhere warm," Claire said. And then she laughed, easy, relaxed, genuinely amused, the way you laugh when something has gone exactly according to plan. I sat in my parked car 4 blocks from my house, listening to my wife laugh about the architecture of my destruction, and I felt that quiet settle over me again. Cold. Still. Absolute. I did not call Dennis. I did not call Gary. I did not call Detective Callahan. Not yet. I want to tell you about Angela Pruitt, because she matters. 2 days after Renee's visit, I hired a private investigator named Carl Upton, retired Columbus PD, recommended by Gary, the kind of man whose entire personality is a filing cabinet. I gave Carl one instruction: find Angela Pruitt. It took him 6 days. She was in Phoenix exactly as Claire had said, staying in a mid-range hotel on Camelback Road, cash payments, registered under a slightly different name. Carl got photographs, got her on record, got a notarized statement from a woman who, it turned out, had not entirely understood what she'd agreed to, and was significantly less comfortable with the situation now that a private investigator was sitting across from her in a hotel lobby, explaining what the word accessory meant. Angela Pruitt was not a criminal. She was a woman who'd needed money and made a catastrophic choice. She gave us everything: how Claire had found her, what she'd been paid, how she'd been coached to stay gone for 60 days. She signed the statement with shaking hands and cried for about 10 minutes. And Carl sat with her until she stopped, because Carl is unexpectedly decent for a man who looks like a filing cabinet. I now had the recorded conversation from the sunroom, and a signed statement from the missing woman who wasn't missing. 2 things Claire didn't know existed. Here is what I did not do. I did not walk into the Columbus PD and hand over the evidence, because evidence handed over by a suspect, however exonerating, becomes part of a legal process. A long, grinding public process during which Claire would lawyer up, go quiet, and spend the next 18 months dismantling everything I'd built from the other side. She was good at dismantling. I knew that now, so I did something simpler. On a Friday evening, while Claire was in the sunroom with her book, in cold blood no less, the audacity of this woman, I sat at the kitchen table and sent 2 things from an email address she had never seen to a phone number she didn't recognize. An audio file and a photograph of Angela Pruitt, alive and well in Phoenix, holding that day's newspaper. No message, no name, no explanation. I closed the laptop, washed my coffee mug, and went to bed. She came downstairs 40 minutes later. I watched through barely open eyes as she stood in the bedroom doorway for a long moment, phone in hand, completely still. In 15 years, I had never seen Claire Ann Jackson stand completely still. She was always moving, always arranging, adjusting, managing. She stood in that doorway like a woman who had just heard a sound she couldn't locate. Good. The next morning I drove to Detective Callahan's office and placed Carl Upton's full report on his desk. The statement, the photographs, the financial records, the call logs. All of it, organized in a navy blue folder with a metal clasp, because I am a thorough man. Callahan read for 11 minutes without looking up. "Mr. Jackson," he finally said. "Roy," I said, "I think we both know I didn't rent that storage unit." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Claire was arrested on a Tuesday. 14 charges, including conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. She was walked out of our house in handcuffs at 9 a.m. on a morning cold enough to see your breath. I watched from the doorway. She looked back at me once, just once, as they guided her toward the patrol car. And for the first time in 18 years, I couldn't read her face. Couldn't find the calculation behind the eyes. Couldn't locate the woman who had studied me like a forger studies a signature. She just looked at me, and I nodded. Because here's what Claire never understood about me: the fundamental miscalculation at the center of her perfect plan. She had spent years watching what I did, where I went, how I signed my name, how I slept. She never once paid attention to what I was thinking. At 51 years old, I am not a dramatic man. I don't make speeches. I don't slam doors. I don't need the last word. I just need the last move. She spent 15 years building a prison for me. I built her one in 19 days. Somewhere out there, Clare Jackson is looking over her shoulder for a ghost she created. A man she underestimated. A husband she thought she knew completely. She knew my signature. She never knew my spine. And that was always going to be her only mistake. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you on the next one.